All right, my friends, welcome back to All Cars. I am John, and this week it is time for another Motorweek Retro review reaction. This week it is the 2002 Land Rover Freelander. Now, this is a vehicle that a CRV outperforms. It's overpriced, the interior is cheap, and it is well known for horrific build quality. So needless to say, I love it. This is a memorable car from the early 2000s for me. It made a huge impact on me when I went and drove one for the first time. And I don't know why I've never thought about doing this before. So, as always, I've not watched this before. This will be my real-time response. Grab your beverage of choice, sit back in your comfy chair, and let's take a little trip down memory lane and see what they said about the Freelander.
With the introduction of the 2002 Freelander, Land Rover now has 3 ranges of SUVs to sell in North America. But the Freelander is quite a bit smaller than most recent Land Rover products, and that raises the question, is the Freelander a true Land Rover? Well, we didn't travel quite to the ends of the earth to find out, but almost to the island volcanic nation of Iceland. Located just south of the Arctic Circle, about halfway between New York and London, Iceland is a nation that to North Americans is almost as mysterious as it seems remote.
That's funny. This is more like a travel video now, but cool. I want to go to Iceland. My wife had a chance to go a number of years ago with her work, and she still talks about it to this day. It made a big impact on her. A stunningly beautiful place. Just interesting how it started off. That was more like Wild Kingdom.
Yet this nation that rivals England in size has a network of both paved and hard-packed gravel roads that make many of the remotest regions reachable by car or at least by SUV. That's why Iceland was chosen by Land Rover to introduce its new Freelander to the American press. Iceland has a population of less than 300,000, with the vast majority situated in and around the cosmopolitan seaport city of Reykjavik. Over 3 days, we drove Freelander through some of the most remarkable terrain on the planet, experiencing just about every conceivable type of road. Arid valleys, volcanic peaks, rushing rivers, and huge glaciers make this a wonderful place to test sport utility vehicles. As a young island with numerous active volcanic areas, it was no surprise to find that barren lava rock not only makes up much of the scenery, but is the stone of choice for most rural roads. Both porous and sharp-edged, even when ground to a fine stone, lava rock can produce a challenging surface for normal street tires. And all the Freelanders we drove had US spec tires, 17-inch on SE and HSE models, and 16-inch on the base Freelander S.
Okay, so again, this seems to be a infotainment infomercial for Iceland. Wow, sorry about that, Greenland. So let me try to talk about this, and I don't know where this is going exactly. Styling-wise, yes, I know I mentioned the CRV at the beginning. Please don't flame me in the comments. There is zero doubt in my mind the Freelander is much more capable than a CRV or a RAV4 of similar years. It is unibody, it's small, and it doesn't have a low range. It's not really a true Land Rover, but it's more than capable of almost anything you need in a little bit of a way. It's like the same approach Ford is taking now with the Bronco Sport. It's not a hardcore off-roader that you're going to take on the Rubicon, but it's got more than enough capability for probably 95-99% of us who aren't going to be doing dedicated off-roading. Style-wise, I love it. I think it's aged very well. The front end doesn't look quite Land Rover-ish enough for me, but the proportions worked wonderfully. The seating position was great. The amount of glass they have here looks great. In some angles like this, it looks vaguely like a Subaru Forester, but just taller. But I absolutely love it. I love the spare tire off the rear. I love the rear tail lights. The headlights work for me if they're not quite as distinguished, but this is more for the urban traveler as well. I absolutely love the exterior. I really do. I actually have looked quite a few times for one for sale, and whenever I find them, they're really high mileage, really worn out, and typically like 300 miles away from me. But this is one of those cars I regret not having bought, but probably would have regretted if I had.
While the 17-inchers were not the quietest tires we've tried, they did a fine job on lava, pavement, and ice. For you can't come to Iceland without trying the national sport of glacier driving. We managed to drive Freelanders about a mile up the vast Langjökull Glacier on street pressure. This gave us a solid idea of how its permanently engaged four-wheel drive system performed and how the first Land Rover with an all-independent suspension would cope with the deep fissures that radiate across the glacier. Normal driving sees a 70-30 torque split front to rear, but up to 95% of the torque is available to the front axle, with a maximum of 50% available at the rear. Freelander has no locking differentials or low range. It directs torque from the wheels that slip to those that grip with a center viscous coupling and all-speed traction control. Minimum ground clearance at 7.2 inches is more than ample for most uses, and Land Rover has done a good job of tucking hardware up out of harm's way. But even with 7 inches of front-wheel travel and 8 inches in the back, the independent suspension did leave you with only 3 wheels on the ground more often than not. Freelander's suspension has been tuned for a combination of traditional Land Rover soft ride and a new manner of car-like handling. Big undulations are soaked up without passenger discomfort, while you may hear small, sharp impacts a lot more than you feel them. When the road gets really rough, there is some steering wheel kickback, but otherwise the Freelander changes directions promptly with an easy-to-correct nature, even when the rear slides out around a lava-coated turn. On paved roads, the steering feedback is much less, but effort is light and will be natural to any newcomers to SUVs. And there may be many, since Freelander is aimed at a much younger audience than its Land Rover stablemates. To that end, they'll find a sportier interior than typical for the brand. One sits on well-supported and well-isolated seats. The top-level HSE gets a unique leather-trimmed sports seat with added side support, while the SE also comes with leather and the S in durable cloth.
So interior-wise, it's a mixed bag for me. Okay, very personal opinion here. On the one hand, it's busy. It's busy, it's cut up, and compared to the quality of the interiors of some of its competitor, granted lesser level competitors, the plastic was cheap. It really was. Still, it ends up holistically being a place that I wanted to spend more time in. You can look at pictures, or you can read and analyze and say, oh, this is cheaper, and this is mess. This doesn't have the ergonomics of something else. But once you're there, it had a sense of presence without feeling busy once you kind of knew where everything was. I think it's rightly criticized for Land Rover in many ways cheapening out the interior. That's my opinion. But honestly, I always thought that stylistically, and when you're actually sitting there, it was worth the premium over some of its lesser competitors.
If we had a complaint, it's the lack of height adjustment. 6-footers sit too close to the headliner. Yet that allows excellent visibility over the Freelander's long aluminum hood, which when...
And you know, even though this is the lowest end of the Freelander, and it's not the Discovery or the Range Rover, it had that commanding view. That was something Land Rover really used to play up in their advertisements. I think they called it command position, if I remember correctly. But you got that sense here. They were trying to make it handle like a car, but they tried to make you feel like you had that downward visibility everywhere. It was a amazing, absolutely amazing sensation.
Topped reveals plenty of space for a new transverse-mounted 2.5-liter V6. Using a 3-stage variable induction system, twin overhead cams, and 24 valves, 175 horsepower and 177 pound-feet of torque are available through a light drive-by wire throttle pedal. At full gait, there is a delightful engine note without the undue vibration of some competitors. Power levels are ample, but there's always room for more. However, more gears are provided. Freelander has the first 5-speed automatic in its class, and it includes manual shift capability. There is also a sport mode for quicker upshifts. Both systems designed to compensate for the lack of a true manual transmission.
And I will say that the numbers aren't fantastic. 175, that's good, but it's not blow your mind. I always found it to be very competent. The problem is, because it's a Land Rover product, the engine was, as I recall, smooth and powerful. If it wasn't going to wow you, it was very competent. And the same thing with the transmission. But that's when I start to get to is it going to hold up?
As is Land Rover's well-regarded hill descent control. With little engine braking available for downhill creeping, HDC uses the standard anti-lock brakes to limit speeds to less than 6 miles per hour. Navigating less serious inclines is helped by the HSC's satellite navigation system, another first for its class. The rear seat is fine for 2 adults or 3 children, and everything folds flat for 46.6 cubic feet of cargo room. While the rear door with the outside spare tire is not our favorite, at least the window lowers for loading small items. Now, Land Rover is a premium brand, and that usually means a big price, but not in the case of the Freelander. Stickers begin at a modest $25,600 for the S, or about what other loaded small SUVs go for. The SE adds sunroof and leather for $28,400, while the HSE trims out with navigation unit at $32,200. Prices that make this Land Rover accessible for more buyers on their way up, or down, or over and around just about any road we could find in Iceland anyway. At this point, most SUV enthusiasts know as little about the Freelander as we did Iceland before our trip. But just as we came away from this Nordic land impressed by the warmth of its people and the amazing variations of its geography, we also left convinced that the Freelander is every inch a Land Rover.
So obviously not their traditional review. They were invited to a press thing and shot this. But a nice little summary overall. I gotta say that, styling is subjective, but those pictures of the interior, that back seat, the rear cargo area folds down flat, plastic covering things to give it some durability. This was an unbelievably attractive car to me. It absolutely does it for me. And the story behind this, and why I'm so excited about this, is that back around this time, we had bought, well, it might have been a little bit earlier than this. Anyway, my first wife and I, we had bought a Honda Accord. And I've talked about that Accord before, that it was the car that made me seriously go, wow, why this is so different than an American-made car. The smoothness of the controls and the shift and the pedal, everything about it wowed me. And I don't know why, but I decided I wanted to go one weekend, because this is how I've driven so many cars over the decades. I was going to go drive the Freelander. And I've always loved, I've talked about here with y'all before, I've always loved Land Rovers. And in a scale of how much I love Land Rovers and the brand and respect their capabilities, it's way over here. The problem is, where I respect Land Rover in terms of their durability, that my belief that nothing is going to go wrong, that the electronics are going to be good, it's over here. But I wanted to go drive a Freelander. And, we had kind of thought about something like a CR-V or a Forester, and I went and drove that Freelander, and I was absolutely blown away by it. I think it was a pretty early one, and then I drove a second one later on that was more after this, as I recall. So I feel like I kind of bracketed this year. I don't remember exactly. But the point is, it stunned me how much I loved it. Now, it was more expensive. It was certainly more expensive than the CRV. Like they said, a loaded out other thing is where the Freelander started at. So it was absolutely more expensive. And, yeah, you could kind of pick apart some parts of the interior, some of the materials. And there was always that question of reliability, but it wowed me. And in fact, I talked about it so much and hummed and hawed over it. My wife at the time had asked, why didn't we just get that? Well, it was because I hadn't driven it before we bought the other car. So I ended up never getting one. And I really regret that. Now, add to this a second thing, which is many, many, many years ago. A relative of mine had gone overseas. I think they went to England and France, maybe a third country in there. And I was like, hey, bring me a car magazine. I cannot find it. I have looked. But it had an expose in it about Rover. And this was after BMW had bought it. And one of the big things they talked about was this Freelander. That BMW came in, they had all this money, and they're like, here, go build a good car. And they started producing the Freelander, and they had endless problems with it. That doors wouldn't fit right, it would leak, or that the body would actually flex enough that like the glass would pop out. Things like that. And that no matter how much they put into it, they could never stop it. Now, this was a multi-page expose, thousands of words. And the Freelander was a part of it, but it stuck in my mind because it wasn't long after I'd driven the Freelander. So, on the one hand, I don't know if the engine's reliable. I don't know if the transmission's reliable. I don't know if the interior falls apart. And I don't know if it flexes and the body cracks and it squeaks and it rattles and shakes itself into pieces. All I know is I drove it. It made a huge impression on me. It got me to drive my first Discovery. It got me into Range Rover. It got me into the Land Rover community where I respect them, and I would love to have one as a prestigious car. And I never have. And that was a cool little review, guys. I appreciate you being here. A nice trip down memory lane because cut through all of that, and it was very capable. It was really, really capable, and it was, for off-roading, it was quite advanced compared to anything else out there. I mean, the Forester, the CRV, or the RAV4 couldn't touch it. And gosh, I wish I'd owned one. Thanks for being here, guys.